Now up next, we have one of the perennial favorite events here at every Gear Fest we've ever done, the Producers Panel. Every year, we gather a tremendous cast of talented and experienced producers, and we get them talking about what it takes to be a producer, what a producer does, how to get great performances out of artists, and lots more. It's always a fascinating session where we all learn a lot. I've been looking forward to it all day. Let's get rolling. Let's bring our crew in. Hello, everybody.
What's up, Mitch?
Great to see you guys. Great to see you guys.
Going on. All right.
Greetings, Mitch.
Gear Fest is what's going on. That's what's happening here. We appreciate you guys sitting down with us, taking the time. So let's start off here. I will introduce you guys, and if you would, wave your hand so that everybody knows who's who that I'm referring to, and then we'll get rolling with some questions. I got some questions here. I think we're probably going to get some questions from social media as well, and we're going to have some fun. All right.
Excellent.
So let's start here. I'll just run down, no particular order. Chris Lord-Alge, good friend of mine, producer, mix and recording engineer, songwriter, musician, multiple Grammys, worked with everyone from Green Day to Aerosmith, Michael Bublé, Sugar Hill Gang, Peter Frampton, Grandmaster Flash, Cheap Trick, Pink, Keith Urban. Is it true, 25,000 songs?
It's over that now, but I'm hoping to get those numbers up when I mix your record.
Yeah. Well, maybe I could add 5 to that. We'll see.
You said it was going to be 30 songs.
Yeah, we'll see.
The weight, what was it? The Weight of Light.
That's the name of it. Yeah, right.
All right.
Next up, Chris Baseford. Chris is a producer, engineer, mixer, Nickelback, Shinedown, Rob Zombie, John 5, CeeLo Green, Tommy Lee, Motley Crue, Fuel, Avril Lavigne, Monster Magnet, many, many more. Glad to have you here. 2 Chris's on one panel. Chris squared, right?
Exactly.
Quentin Gilkey, my apologies, Grammy-winning mixer and engineer, producer, Eminem, Kendrick Lamar, The Game, Earl Sweatshirt, soundtrack for the Academy Award-winning film 12 Years a Slave, and he's been working with Dr. Dre for the past 8 years or so. Glad to have you here, Quentin.
Thank you for having me, guys.
You bet. And Joe Barresi, engineer, producer. His credits include Tool, Queens of the Stone Age, Chevelle, Coheed and Cambria, Bad Religion, Avenged Sevenfold, Nine Inch Nails, Slipknots, lots of heavy bands, many more. Glad to have you here, Joe.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Andrew Scheps, good to see you again, Andrew. Mix and recording engineer, producer, label owner, Grammy winner, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Adele, Ziggy Marley, Black Sabbath, Beyonce, Josh Groban, Kid Rock, Metallica, Weezer, Mars Volta, and many more. Glad to have you here, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
Right there in the center. You got the what is it? Was it the Hollywood Squares, right?
Squares, man.
And last, certainly not least, Henny Tha Bizness, producer, songwriter, educator, YouTuber. His credits include Drake, Chris Brown, Lil Wayne, Jay-Z, 50 Cent, Black Eyed Peas, Young Jeezy, Brandy, Ice Cube, many more. And he's also a professor. He teaches music production, online branding, and music technology at Morehouse College. Glad to have you here, Henny.
Awesome. Thank you. Right on.
Yeah, so let's, how about if we kick things off by just defining what a producer does? And maybe we'll start up there in the upper left corner. Joe, would you kick us off? Tell us what does a producer do, and what is a producer?
I would say kind of like a facilitator of recording music, producing, more like psychiatry. Sometimes you're the best friend, sometimes you're the tough love.
Mm-hmm.
The person that kind of makes the room easy to create in, like sometimes just having an instrument laying around in a non-threatening way and just inspiring a musician to just be at home and comfortable with themselves and then create music. And there's a lot that goes with it. There's a lot of psychology, a lot of just being aware of what's happening in the situation and capturing it, and knowing when it's good and when it's not going to be good and move into something else.
Right. There's a lot of aspects to it. And I'm curious as we move through, because you've all been in the business for a different amount of years, work with a variety of different genres and things, and producer means different things to different people. Chris B will say, does it mean anything different to you or anything to add to that?
I think you kind of summed it up pretty nicely there, Mitch, with how it means something different to everybody. There are artists I work with where I'm hired as a producer to literally just be their support system. And if they need, like Joe said, if they need somebody to kick them in the ass and kind of be tough love, if they need a hug and they need some encouragement, That's why you're there, to kind of keep things moving in the right direction, just from a psychological standpoint. And then there are other artists where you need to do everything. You need to help find the songs. You need to build the tracks. You need to put the musicians together. And you're like, what a producer or a director would do in the film business. You're doing, everything and heading off the entire thing, making creative decisions, the entire spectrum. So for me, in my role as a producer, it's very artist dependent, depending on what they need, and needing to know what they need, also knowing what they don't need, and not stepping on that part of what they like to have control over, or what they're trying to bring to the table.
Right. Let's jump down to Henny. What do you think?
Yeah, from what everybody said so far, from a coach to a psychiatrist to, a leader, in the urban world, and it's a little different, because sometimes you start out as a beat maker, and a producer is just the one who's just going to supply, those tracks to try to get to those songwriters, those artists, to be able to get a record placed. And then as you move up the ladder, you get more experience, you get more opportunity, and then you become, a facilitator in the room, somebody who can bring people together, somebody who can, really help bring these records together and help bring people's lives together. So yeah, it's been quite an experience for me, coming from a beat maker's perspective 20 years ago to being a facilitator in the room. So I can agree with everybody speaking so far. Yeah.
Right. Andrew, what do you say from the center square?
There's not a lot to add. I think that, like everyone said, the production role on every single job is different, and sometimes every day on a project is different. But the consistent thing is you're there to have an opinion. You're there to be an outsider with an insider's role throughout the project and have an opinion. It's not necessarily the opinion that'll take the day, but you're someone to bounce things off of, supposedly have a little bit of perspective that the band's not going to have, and also keep the big picture in mind. Realize that you're making a record. You're not just working on that snare drum, and keeping everything in context.
Right. Quentin, what do you think?
I think everyone's pretty much covered it. The only thing I would probably add is sometimes I like to think of a producer as like old versus new. So in the old terminology, I'd like to think of it as a person that sees a record from start to finish. Right? So they understand the creative process all the way down to the mastering process, and they're a part of a record all the way through. But other than that, everyone else has already touched on everything.
Right. Chris, you're never short on opinions. What do you have to say? What do you want to add?
Well, the Big Q had a good point there, and so did Andrew. What about the snare drum? That is the most important part of the record. At least my records. Since I've been around before Christ was born and produced a lot of records since then, I think you have to be the commander. You have to be the confident person in the room, the decision maker. You got to shepherd these people down the road, because they get distracted and they go off on tangents that make absolutely no sense. So you have to kind of shepherd them to the finish line. I think a producer is the person that can actually make a compilation of songs, an album, whatever you want to call it now, and get it to the finish line, get it to mastering, deal with the label, right? But be the confident person. And, to get respect as a producer, sometimes being a musician, being able to go out there and sing, being able to play on it, get some respect with the band. Because, bands are like, well, what are you going to do? You're just an engineer that now you're in the hot seat. Because a lot of times the engineer becomes the producer by default, because they respect what you're doing and they just want to keep it inside a small circle. And that's how I've seen it happen to me, where you're just the one that can make a decision, can close the deal. If you can close 10 songs in 30 days and get it to mastering, that's a real producer. Getting it done, because records I'm producing right now are all in the works. The only thing that gets a record done is a release date. Until then, it's a lot of screwing around. So you're really, as a producer, you're really trying to be the solid foundation, Mitch, that gets the project done and doesn't make the artist feel belittled, because you're kind of helping them. It's kind of showing them get past their ideas and get it to the finish line without it just being a recreation of the demo. So
right.
That was my instinct.
So it kind of sounds like you've got to be the adult in the room.
Exactly. The producers, believe me, the producers I've been around my life, I learned so much from how they can turn the room into their room. They come and they put, it's like it's like Luke Skywalker. Everyone's, under his command. And I think it helps. And I think an artist wants someone to come in a little larger than life that knows everything that's going on, paying attention, can hear a wrong note from a mile away and can keep the ship going in the right direction. And that's what I've learned from watching the big guns do it.
Right, right. So one of the key elements there is, we always hear this when someone's starting out in the studio, but it seems to translate over once you're a producer as well, is knowing when to say something and when not to say something. I was talking to Warren Haynes, and he was telling me that when the Allman Brothers worked with Tom Dowd, Tom would always be in the back of the room as long as the band was rolling, but he'd know exactly when to step in and to help push their creative process forward or to solve the question or whatever. Let's move over to Chris B to start this one. Tell me how you know when it's the time to step in and when you're not stepping on the artist.
That's actually a really tough one. And I think that just comes with experience. And like CLA mentioned, like watching when you're coming up, working with other producers and seeing how they interact and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and being able to get a read on people to see how they respond. Like I think one of the most sensitive situations in the studio, at least for me, is tracking vocals. So you've got a singer in there, which is, they're performing the most important part of, aside from the snare drum, of course, they're doing the most important part of the song. And I've got singers that, even like Andrew said, in the same day might want something different. You're producing them and you're giving them feedback, and then they might say, "Hey, just stop talking. Let me do this. Let me do 3 takes. Don't give me pointers between them." And then that same day, that same singer, sometimes even that same take or that same batch of takes, you leave a little bit too much space during playback where you don't say anything, and you leave them hanging a little bit, and all of a sudden that kind of gets them thinking and it gets in their head. So it's a very delicate balance. I think it just comes with experience, and I think that's what sometimes what makes a really great producer versus maybe just an okay producer is somebody who can read the person they're working with and be able to pick up on what they need at that particular time. Do they need feedback? Do they need you to step back and just let them do their thing because they know what they want to do? They just need time to get it out. That's the delicate balance that I think that we have to walk a lot of the time.
Right. Quentin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Chris, you nailed it. I think it's like a delicate ecosystem, and I think as a producer, sometimes you have to be very it's like this adaptability, right? So you have to be able to read a person quickly, understand the client you're working with, the artist you're working with, the musicians, and then know that, maybe if I'm on the talk back too much, I'm taking them out of their creative zone, or, if I need to be on it more. And you have to be quick in that sometimes and read the room. I think someone mentioned that earlier, but yeah, Chris, you nailed it. I think that basically is it.
Right, right. So things have changed so dramatically in the industry, and certainly in the last 15, 18 months, with so many people now working at home and so many people are working on their own. One of the big challenges for musicians and songwriters is a lot of them are being faced with producing themselves. Do any of you have advice or suggestions for someone who's going to produce themselves or is working on their own? Andrew, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a part of the same questions we've been answering already. I mean, it's a tightrope between, if you're an outside producer, you've probably made hundreds of times more records than the people you're producing, but you've made fewer records of theirs than they've made. And so it's trying to understand what they think their record is, because you're always making somebody else's record. A bad producer is somebody who's making his record no matter who the artist is. Not necessarily bad, but it's just that's not a production style that makes much sense to me. You're always making their record. So in that way, if you can, I mean, I think the question is sort of if you're involved with an artist who's self-producing, or if an artist wants to self-produce without any outside input, then I think they've got to make their own outside input by doing a lot of listening, a lot of trying to get into the details of records that they love, of background vocal arrangements or guitar arrangements, or how are people making the records? Because it's the craft of making the record they may not have the knowledge of, and that's where they've got to try and get that. Or just have a vision and stick to it and do something that no one's ever heard before, and that's fine too. But it's trying to understand where you're going. You've always got to be going somewhere, and don't get hung up on the snare. even though it's the most important.
I don't know. The snare's most important. I heard that somewhere. Joe, do you have anything to add to that question about self-producing?
Yeah, I think it's just really being able to step outside your world and just look at it as a fan, I think, is where I try to come from. You know, if I'm working with an artist self-producing, a lot of times you get stuck down the same road. You're used to hearing the same tracks, the same songs, the same samples, the same whatever. And then somebody comes in and says, well, you know, maybe you should double that chorus. And it's a little foreign to them because they've heard it the same way every time. So being able to just get away from it for a minute, you know, get an outside view if you're into it, and just at least try it. That's usually my philosophy for anybody, whether they're self-produced or not. Just try the idea. Let's see if it leads to something else. You know, I mean, it might be something you never even thought about, just doubling a chorus, and then all of a sudden you're listening to it and you go, well, if I was in the audience listening to this song and it hit that moment, it's the payoff, and I would really like to hear it again. You're right. Maybe I should just cut and paste this thing and check it out. So.
Right. That's the big challenge, right, is whether you're going to look at something from a subjective standpoint, that you're doing it yourself, or whether you can step back and be objective, which is a big part of what a producer really brings to the project is that objectivity. Exactly. Henny, anything to add into the conversation on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, you know, what Joe and Andrew are saying is right on the money. I mean, the only thing is just, you know, for a lot of these younger guys that are just getting started, you know, they get so caught up in, you know, seeing these bigger studios, seeing these bigger, you know, pieces of gear, and they're feeling like they have to wait and save or do something so they can be professional. But in today's day and time, you know, the quality of you know, equipment, everything has gotten so good and so minimal, you know, that, you know, don't get so caught up in your head, and don't be so worried about the copycat syndrome of just trying to be like your favorite producer. You know, you got to try, you got to think outside the box. There is no one right way to do, you know, what you're trying to do. So you might as well go ahead and just start trying to get creative. And then as you're trying to produce these records, you know, play for those that you truly trust and see what their feedback is, because it starts with those who really just consume music versus those who want to produce music. And then you get that feedback from those who have a normal ear, and then you'll say, oh, okay, well, then I can learn a little bit more. And then you can take it to somebody that, you know, maybe can help you establish that sound a little bit better. But don't be so afraid to just start and try something that you've never done before.
Right. CLA, what are you going to close us out with?
Well, the self-producing, yes, it is challenging. And the earlier question you had about dealing with the production and the vocals and all that. Look, to me, if I can have the vocalist in here, I can get the best out of them. And all the singers I've done, and during COVID, did a whole bunch of, like 6 records I produced. I've done 100 vocals here. I find that getting the vocals with them face-to-face is everything. You can let the band self-produce all they want, and then you can edit it and kind of show them the picture you want to create. And I think, as we're all editors are really good at arranging and doing that, it's great. And then what Henny said, bounce it off the normal folk, the straights, I call it. Hey, I got a PA in my backyard. We have a dinner party. I'll put a song on. If I get a reaction, I know we're going somewhere good. If I don't, I know it's down the dumper. But it's really hard. It's really hard with musicians to let them self-produce, because when you're with them, you can actually shepherd them to go beyond their thoughts, beyond their means, beyond what they're, and if they hear the record being created in front of them, as all of us are mixers, right? And when we're producing, we're just adding to the mix. The mix is being made on the spot. When they hear what works and what doesn't, rather than just piling on stuff that may not work, they can actually see how it creates the final project. And having them do vocals externally, it's challenging. I have one artist that she's a little sheepish. She has a little way she does it. She sends them to me. I tweak and edit them. I do the backgrounds for her or help do that. That works. But generally, when you have a singer that's kind of not 100% sure of melodies and phrasing, my talk back is on every time. I don't want them to think that we're saying something behind their back. Okay. And I think that's the biggest problem with a vocalist. If they see your lips moving and they don't hear it, it's disrespectful. So I say right in the beginning, I say, look, here's how it's going to go. You may not like what I'm going to say, but I'm going to make sure that every time we stop, you hear what we're saying. Okay. And I'm only focusing on, I want you to hear this song done as quick as possible. And then we can go back and say, hey, what works and what doesn't, rather than digging this hole in verse 1 or chorus 1, or, I mean, you can't sing the line 20 times. It's not going to improve. And then, as you said, there's some singers that come in prepared. They've done their homework and they just blow right through it, like Tina or Joe or Rod or Mick. these are the ones that kind of perform it. And when I had Mick here, he's like, you think you can produce me? Go ahead, give it a shot. And I'm like, that chorus is really flat. Can you try it one more time? Want me to fix your headphones up? Your headphones bad? These are with a 58. But I think with singers, when they know you're making a headphone mix, you got to make sure that what you're hearing is what they're hearing. So there's no trickery. And don't ever let them have a little console. Oh, my God, that's disastrous. Make sure that what they hear is perfect, because that dictates, because what's going to throw them off key. And I think that relationship where they trust you to just be honest. I don't want to sit there and massage your ego. Let's just leak the ego at the door and get the best you can do. Because I'm going to say, you know what? You're worn out. Let's go. Let's come in tomorrow. Now that you got an idea what the track sounds like, let's knock it out when you're fresh. Because if you can't sell a song, nobody cares.
Right. Henny, you were nodding there, and this is a big topic, right? Getting a great performance out of an artist when you're working with them. Do you have tricks or techniques or approaches that you use to get the most out of an artist's performance?
You got to preheat the oven. I do a lot of cooking, and you don't just, you go into the studio, you don't just start working. You have to start building that relationship, especially if it's somebody that you haven't worked with before. You got to have some conversation as the producer, you have to be even more vulnerable to talk about the things that you would like to, see it. And it's that balance between being vulnerable and then being very strong, so it's like being a parent. You got to slap them on the wrist and then give them a hug. It's one of those things to where you got to make sure that you have good synergy in the room, good relationship in the room, and even if they bring somebody with them, actually bring them in the conversation, because that person, whether it be that friend, that boyfriend, that somebody, sometimes that one person in the room can cause that energy to shift. So bring them into the conversation as well, and preheat that oven in studio so that you can cook. It might take an hour, it might take 3, or like CLA said, you might just have a conversation for the day and say, you know what, we should probably come back tomorrow because all we did was talk today. But then we come back tomorrow, we're going to be ready to go. So that's kind of.
I like the preheat the oven thing. That's a good way of putting it. Because if they're best friends with them, that gives them confidence level beyond you, because they're a little sheepish you, going, oh my God, Henny's going to freak me out. Henny's freaking me out now. Mm-hmm. But one little secret, one little trick is, because I always work with my assistant as fast as we can. And if they do a line that's just a little out, but it's perfect, I have them tune it so fast. So when we play it back, it's like, yeah, that sounds good. Because you got to tune as you go so they don't get freaked out, because they'll keep singing it over and over again. Anyway,
right.
Mitch?
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, it's, again, I hate to keep on just kind of, saying that it's so situationally dependent, but it absolutely is. I mean, there like Henny mentioned, when you're working with somebody new, there's a lot of just relationship building and just trial and error and finding out what they like and what they don't like. Do they like the lights on and yeah. All the analogies we can use, the lights on, lights off, candles lit, candles not lit, like everybody wants something different. And a couple of the tricks that I've sometimes used, especially when working with new artists, is having kind of a no stress setup day where it's like, oh yeah, we're just going to come in, we're going to get set up. We're going to listen to, if we had done bed tracks that they're going to be singing on, or if it's a track that came from somebody else, we're just going to listen to the track, kind of get everything set up, do some levels, find the right mic, the right pre's, all that stuff. Meanwhile, they think that's just a setup day. Meanwhile, me and if there's an engineer with me and the staff, like we're fully prepared to get final takes. Whether we have, a one mic that's on through a very clean pre that we can use if we need to while we're testing out other mics next to it. Like we're ready to get final takes, but they don't have the pressure of, okay, now the light's on, I'm performing right now with this new person in this new environment. So disarming as much as possible, making them comfortable, and just figuring out what's going to get the best performance. And sometimes it's trial and error. But if any piece of advice that I could give in any scenario, whether it be with a new artist or somebody you've been working with for a long time, be prepared for the first thing that comes out of their mouth being the best thing they ever do. So don't rely on like, oh, I didn't have my level set, or, oh, I didn't have the right mic up. Like have so many contingencies. So if that's the only one that they do that you're like, man, that I'll never get that again, make sure you've done your setup and your preparation to where you can actually use that. If you got to do some EQ matching or level matching later or whatever you got to do, make sure you're prepared to get that. Because there's been a lot of times where, if I've just kind of been a fly on the wall on somebody else's session or dropping by to see a buddy, I see that happen, and I'll be like, oh, that's the one. And then I see them beating their head against the wall for an hour trying to recreate that because, the mic pre was too hot or, the compressor overloaded or something. So be prepared to catch that one no matter what your scenario is.
Right. This kind of ties back to the very first thing you were talking about, Joe, where you're talking a lot about psychology and getting that great performance. There's a lot of psychology that goes into that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you have to be nurturing and get the performance out of the person, the singer, but at the same time, you can't, like everybody's mentioned, you can't let it go all day and beat somebody so they can't sing the next day. Could be something as simple as a headphone mix. I mean, getting in and listening to a singer's headphone mix is probably the single most important thing ever. Even a drummer is another thing. You can just beat the hell out of cymbals and realize it doesn't sound good, but a drummer's playing exciting. But you turn the cymbals up in the headphones where they don't beat them as hard. Now all of a sudden you've got a drum kit with some tone to it. So if they're singing too flat or too sharp, you can adjust that headphone mix without saying, hey, you're singing too sharp or too flat. Otherwise they start getting self-conscious. So you can literally go in and turn the bass down a little bit. Maybe it's a little too flubby, especially with drop tune, bass guitars and stuff. So being aware of those little simple adjustments and being, supportive the whole time. And then maybe, going home and doing a little editing at night, fixing some stuff up and say, check out this thing. This is great. But I think you could probably beat a couple spots, re-sing it, and you build that confidence. And when you get a couple songs in, I mean, I never understood why when we made rock records, waiting to the end to do the vocals was crazy to me, because all that pressure on a singer just going, well, now I've got to sing 10 songs. Everybody had a month to make a record. I've got 2 days left in our budget to sing everything. So getting the singer involved early is important to me. And finding that right microphone while you're doing bed tracks and then saying, hey, man, this microphone sounds great on you right now. So maybe we go back and track that first song that wasn't the greatest performance anyway, without saying, it was a shitty performance or whatever. Let's retract this. So there's so many factors involved. It's crazy, but creating that environment where it's very easy and not where you're thinking about nothing else but creativity is really important to me.
Right. Andrew, you were nodding your head there. I'm curious further on this topic.
Yeah.
Is it different when you are working with an established artist versus a new artist trying to get a good performance out of them?
I think the thing with newer artists is they're less used to being in the studio. So you have to spend more time making them comfortable and making the studio disappear so they feel like they're still in their rehearsal room. Whereas established artists have just done it more, so you don't have to spend as much time doing that. But I think the biggest mistake I've ever seen engineers make and producers make is to treat artists differently based on their stature. I think one of the reasons I can work with the people I've been able to work with is I treat them exactly like I'm making a record with someone who's never done anything. And you're there to work on the music you're working on. You're not working on their catalog. That's already been done. So they've got something they've got to beat, which is even harder than if you're a new artist, but you're just there working on exactly what you're doing. And I just want to reiterate, I can't stress enough how important the headphone mixes are.
Yeah.
And so many engineers never go listen to them. They have no idea what the band's listening to. And that's the record as far as they're concerned while they're playing. And then what Joe said about the vocals. Yeah, the worst thing in the world is saving lead vocals for the end. Like, what a nightmare for a singer.
Right.
The headphone mix is everything. You're right, Andrew. I mean, I'm listening to their headphone mix, and I have the same headphones here, and I'm like using old school power amp stereo, clean path. So that's everything, because and I go to studios where they have these mixers out there, and I go hear what they're hearing. I'm like, disaster. So yeah, you're 100% right.
Right. Quentin, just finishing out this topic here, when you're working with an established artist, though, you kind of have to establish your credibility with them, right? I mean, how do you establish that I'm the one that's going to be helping to drive you so you can get that great performance out of them?
I mean, I think in my experience, a lot of time it's a little bit of trial and error, right? So in my experience, sometimes like when they come in, there's always that question the first time you're working with someone, if they're established or not. And I think that a little bit of time and a little bit of like, again, adapting to the situation can really make or break it. And I think that if you really focus on what they need and nurturing them, as someone said, like that in itself will help the situation and make the session go great.
Right.
And just be good at what you're doing.
Yeah, and confident, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of key, right?
Confidence.
Right. Well, if you guys see me looking off to the, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
And Chris is right about having the vocal chain ready. I mean, I have the same vocal chain that I've had for 100 songs. It's bomb-proof because the first lyric out of their mouth is great, always in record, no matter what. And it's a 5047 and a 1073 knockoff and my Bluey compressor. It's like, you know what? This is like 99% of all vocals work on here. And I just want to capture that first run, that first pass, especially with an emotional singer. It's like, here's the record. Okay, let's eat.
Well, you guys may see me. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had that with Tina Turner. I had it with Tina Turner. It's like she's already got the vocal down before she even walks in the room.
Chris,
That's fast, right?
Chris, where am I singing? Where's the mic? Come on, let's go. Where's the song?
Right.
I got this. Come on.
That's
Can we
awesome.
do the second song right after it?
No, that's what she did.
That's awesome. We got some social media questions over here, and I like this one. Scott Hayes asks, have you ever had to fire an artist? Let's start with Andrew.
No.
Okay. Have any of you ever had to fire an artist?
I fired myself off of record.
There you go.
But
exactly.
the artist is still going to make a record.
So why would you fire yourself off of a project?
That it's something about the situation's untenable. You just get in there and realize either they have no interest in collaborating at all, and they're not people you want to hang out in a room with, not being creative, or usually it's that. Usually it's about personalities more than anything else. It's just you know that you're not actually going to be good for them, and you're going to hate it. So you're not the right person for the job.
Right.
But it's only happened a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. Right. Anybody else had to do that either way? Chris B,
sometimes it's go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Joe.
Sometimes it's substance abuse. So, in those cases, it's not really conducive to continue with a person who might actually die with continuing doing what they're doing. So you bring somebody else in and you try to help that person get clean or whatever you have to do. So.
Right. Wow. Joe, what do you think?
Oh, that was me.
Yep.
Chris?
I'm sorry. I apologize, Chris.
All right.
I did an album with a band, and for 45 days, the singer didn't show up once.
Wow.
And this was kind of status quo for the band. They'd kind of struggled with this in the past, and they were an established band that had put out 4 or 5 albums before. And we made it to where there literally was nothing left to be done except for vocals. And management, label, everybody was trying to get this guy to show up. And then he finally showed up, at the very, very end, just was like, nah, I'm not ready to sing. I'm not. And I'm like, I can't go on. So I basically said, like, I'm done. You guys can have somebody else go finish your record. Interesting enough, probably about 10 years later, I showed up to a session that was just kind of like a collaborative session, and the singer showed up. And first time I'd seen or heard from him in 10 years, and he pulled me aside and like full on apology. And he's like, man, I'm so sorry about that, blah, blah, blah. I was in a bad place. And like Joe mentioned, I don't know if that was the issue, but there was obviously other stuff going on there. But at some point, as professionals, and we're showing up, and even the rest of the band was showing up, at some point you just gotta like put your foot down. And I had other projects that were being pushed back because of it, and at the end of the day, you gotta move on. I've also had the opposites, or not the opposite, but like Andrew said, I've done mix gigs where, I'll be in like, second, third song in, and you realize like the first song of infinite recalls and the second song of infinite conversations about creative direction. And then on the third song, you're just like, you guys obviously don't want what I just inherently do. and it's best just to be like, hey, let's part ways. I know 2 other guys who will do exactly what you want. Stylistically, that's just not the way I hear things. And you just kind of pull out of the project. And ultimately, everybody ends up being happier as opposed to being pissed off that you struggled through 10 songs or 12 songs and they ultimately didn't get what they want and everybody was kind of banging heads. It's better just to realize that early on if you can.
Right. Anybody else? All right.
Only had to fire a band member. That's about it. Only had to really fire a band member, and it was kind of, the whole team would say, hey, you got to be out. And as far as I don't care how tough they think they are or how cocky they are, eventually they come around. And I think part of being a seasoned veteran is how you win no matter what. It's how you find a way. Because, look, when you're working with an artist, and like Andrew said, sometimes it just doesn't work. On mixes, that can happen. But when you're in the producer's chair, maybe you can crack the code. I always find that somewhere you find that thing that cracks the code and it works. Or you shoot them. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think by the time you're actually in the producer's chair, you're past the point of thinking it may not work. Now, unless something crazy happens, like Joe's saying. But yeah, I'm more thinking about mixing, where you just realize, like, creatively or personally, it's not ever going to come together. Because you don't hang out before you start mixing. The shit just shows up. You hit play, you push up faders, and then you find out, oh, that's not going to work.
Right.
But it's rough mix, and it's also they're used to their last mix. They've heard it more than 10 times. There's nothing you're going to do to change that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So run.
Let's take another social media question here. Paula Benson asks, how do you stay fresh and relevant as a producer? Why don't we start with Quentin?
I think that's a tough one. For me, you would never want to chase like the top 10, in my opinion. You always just want to make the music that's great for the artists and the musicians you're working with and what feels good here. For me, I'm never chasing like a top 10 record or whatever like that. It's just make great music, and I think let the rest happen.
Right. Joe, anything to add to that?
For me, it's it's just really listening to everything. I get inspired by putting the radio on my way to work and listening to a song. I go, wow, I never heard that keyboard that blown out before. Maybe I come in the next day and I start distorting stuff, and to me, it's just listening to, also getting inside a band's head and figuring out what it is they like. I mean, that's, so if you're making a certain style of music, to figure out what they like about that style of music or other bands in that style of music, and educate yourself on, could be anything. It could be anything from metal to jazz or whatever. I mean, they might like a guitar sound, Wes Montgomery thing. And then so it's just educating yourself, and then also trying to separate the whole picture and approaching it as a listener. That's really what it comes down to. I mean, in the end, we're selling it, you're selling it. So am I going to buy this? Do I want to hear this when it's done? Am I going to put it on a year from now or 6 days from now? Or am I still excited when I throw it on a year from now? And so just clearing your head, getting into different projects is really important. Switching songs is really important. If you go down the wormhole and focus on one thing too long, then you fall into that hole too. So maybe getting off the subject for a bit and going somewhere else and coming back is great.
Right. Henny, what do you think?
Yeah, I've always, always thought to have somebody to mentor and then somebody to mentor you. If you're, grateful enough to have that situation, so you're learning from the past and you're also learning from the future, and always keeping that young kid around that you can, you see they have super raw talent, and you're learning from them just as much as they're learning from you. And then on the flip side, you being a little bit seasoned, but finding somebody who's even more seasoned or even had even more experience than you can see where your future's headed. So you kind of have this overall balanced mind state of kind of how to keep things fresh, but then always, sometimes you need to go back and think about how certain things were done in the past, maybe decades before, to be able to recreate something that maybe can be reinvented in this day and time. So keeping a mentor and keeping a mentee has always helped me. So
Right. One of the challenges with staying fresh is making productions that aren't going to sound dated. There's those characteristics we can look back on different decades, if you will, and we can see things that pinpoint. How do you avoid those as you're trying to stay fresh? Chris B., you want to start that off?
That for me is actually one of the biggest challenges that I find, and kind of, if I had to kind of highlight a weakness that I'm constantly working on, is I do need to be very active in listening to, forcing myself to kind of go through the top whatever lists, depending on what kind of music you're making, whatever genres or the radio formats. I have to force myself not so much to chase it, but just to be aware. So that way, depending on what artist you're working with, and depending on, if they are trying to go after a format, or if that's where, they ultimately, where their target is, you need to be aware of, what that format is playing, whether it be, radio or a Spotify playlist, and it could be something as simple as the way the drums sound, or, the vocals got, a certain, distortion on it. Oh, they're not going to play that because it's too blown out. Or, the kick and snare drum are way, too quiet. It's not going to be able to compete next to this other stuff. So I don't necessarily like to chase it, but you need to be aware of it. And I think it's not to be the linchpin of the decision. It just needs to be kind of there and be aware of it to support where you're heading, where you're steering the ship. Because ultimately what really sucks, and I've been in the position where, a song goes to radio and then you start getting feedback of, a couple little small production tweaks that you thought you were doing to be kind of edgy, or maybe, somebody is like, oh, we have to do this because somebody else did it. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that's not really translating the same way. And all of a sudden it doesn't get the exposure that you're looking for. So I think you need to be aware of it, but, just not necessarily make decisions based off of it. But I think being educated and listening to lots of different stuff at all times is a really smart thing. And I have to force myself to do it, but it's something that I think needs to be done.
Right. Andrew, anything to add?
No, I mean, you need to be aware of stuff, but I think where you will get pigeonholed or do something that sounds dated is when you do a specific technical thing because people are doing it. But it's like when everybody was chasing Despacito and put Quattro on every single track that came out. That's not why that track was big. Maybe it was because it was the first one in a long time to use that instrument in that way or whatever, but you can never copy the success of anything. And it always is in the context of the music you're working on. So I feel like I want to have lots and lots of input from listening really, really widely and ignore all of it. And we just work on the version of what I'm working on that's in my head, whether that's mixing or producing. And I think as soon as you get specific, especially technically, about anything you're doing, it's not going to hold up. It will not hold up.
All right. CLA, what are your thoughts?
Andrew, I kind of agree with you. How do you not make it sound dated? Well, I'm so dated that it's coming back around. So my ideas are 70s and 80s. So, I mean, I don't do any homework. I don't care. If I hear a song, a vocal, a melody, and a chord change, okay, that's the substance. And then if they have a demo, I can hear the song, the finished song, as soon as I hear the demo. I see the big picture already. And I just go down the road of whatever kind of song that is, ballad, pop, rock, and just follow what I think is going to work for that. And I just let my instinct take over. I mean, I don't listen. I mean, what I listen to Genesis and Pink Floyd at home at night, and I listen to AM radio because I don't want this is opposite of what Chris said. I don't want the influence. I want what I generally think, my first instinct on a mix or a song or something creative to be completely without influence, because they hired me because I do a certain thing. So I just want to do that certain thing. I may copy something because it's been done before. It's been done in the 70s or 80s. I mean, half the stuff we hear in the radio, it's all from the 70s and 80s. There's only 12 notes in the scale, and there's only so many tempos that work. And I think that being as flatline creative as possible is really the thing, and not spending much time on it. Like, go and do it quick. Being fresh. Look, they're hiring you for your gut reaction without any influence. So that's just what I've been doing. That's why my snare drum sounds the same since 1975.
The snare drum,
all right here, Chris, is what you feel, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think an artist brings a song. Henny, artist brings a song.
Yeah.
You get a feeling on the melody or the sense of the vocal. Is this going to be like tough pop or is this going to be Sade? And you're like, yeah, I get this. Let me play the keyboard. I got an idea. Not even thinking about, I'm going to make this sound like this or that. Like, I don't even care what's going on. I care what's going on right here, right now.
Well, it's that instant picture you're talking about. You hear the demo and other people hear the demo and like, well, what's this? And you're like, no, this is going to be a badass record.
Yes.
Right. It's going to be this. I already see the finish line. I already see mastering.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's. I think you already kind of see. I know where this is going to go.
Right.
And hope that your ideas work for them. Mitch Gallagher.
So what is the we have so many of our viewers and so many musicians want to be producers and they want to be working with artists. What is the number one skill that they can develop? Can we start with you, Henny?
Decisiveness.
Yeah. You answered very decisively there.
I mean, it's the power of being a producer is being able to make quick decisions, just like CLA was saying. You don't have to spend all day, in and out. It's the same way with being a video editor or anything else. Being decisive on those moves, seeing that big picture and knowing, okay, yep, I see this, I see where this can go. I'm going to use everything in my power, but then I'm not going to overthink it too much. I'm going to be decisive and be strong in that decision. So that's my answer.
Right. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, decisiveness is pretty much it. You're steering the ship. Are we going left or right? Or, it's what it really comes down to me. It's just being able to knowing when to make that decision maybe is I can add to that, just giving a little bit of the rope and then let's see how far you can take it. And then making the decision like this is really going into a new direction and what you're doing is cool and inspiring something, or just sinking it right now and starting again somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, what do you think? What's the number one skill?
Yeah, what they're saying, and I think you've got to be really, really, really good at what you do. You can't be the second best engineer or producer in the room when you're producing. You've got to be the best producer and the best engineer and be able to do anything anybody wants to have happen and not let the session bog down while you figure it out.
All right, CLA?
I mean, see, Andrew, you always, have the good answer. But so the question was for our social media question was, how does a beginner become a producer? Okay. Well, you got to earn it, kids. I'm sorry. There's no shortcuts. Okay. So you got to get in there and be an assistant, be an engineer, learn how to be focused, learn how to be present, learn how to keep your mouth shut, learn how to know when to make decisions, but be confident. A producer's job is to be completely confident and deliver a final product. So if you're gonna do your first production, it's gonna be taking someone's song, putting all your ideas into it, and finishing it. You can always go back on a decision, but at least make one to begin with. Believe me, I've gone back and said, "Yep, I think that beat was real crap. Now let's redo it." But at least at the moment, in the heat of the moment, you're like, "We're gonna do this, this, and this. I'm gonna arrange it here. Here we go. Here's the mix." That puts you in the hot seat. You're making decisions, and they feel empowered because you're going to deliver a final.
Right.
And I think that's it. But you got to earn it. It's like these guys that are fresh out of an academy of God knows what, and they're now engineer, producer, mixer, mastering engineers. Really?
Quentin, what would you add, Quentin?
Learn it, earn it. Love it.
Oh no, I was just going to add to the decisiveness term is just say that you have to know when to stop sometimes, and just say, you know what, let's just sit on this record that we got to this point. Let's just see how we feel tomorrow or whatever. And I also think like you're in the driver's seat, right? So you can either push the gas pedal, you can push the brake. You may have people and other passengers in the car that are going to have input on which way should you turn left or right, but ultimately you're the driver here. So, it's being confident and decisive.
Right. Chris, anything to add?
The cue is on. The cue is on it, man. Cue.
Thank you.
I mean, it's been not a lot to add. I mean, I think maybe as just a slightly all-encompassing skill set, this is going to mean something different to everybody. It's just leadership, and I think being decisive is obviously a part of being a good leader, but. Just learning how to be a good leader. And that means something different to everybody. I mean, if, I know producers that come from a band background and what they bring to the table is the real creative part. and maybe they're not so good at interacting with the labels, or they're not so good at, dealing with, mixed recalls or giving the mastering guy, direction or anything like that. That's not what they do. But they are a great producer. They lead through their creative skills. And I think being able to figure out like who you are, what do you bring to the table, and how can you utilize what you're really good at to become a good leader and help the other people that you're working with get the project to the finish line, like CLA was saying. And I think that's really, again, it's different for everybody, but I think, being a good leader is probably the thing that separates, really, really great producers from maybe somebody who's just kind of getting going and doesn't really understand that part of it.
Right.
Can I just add one thing? Because I think as we're talking about what a producer is, there are also sort of two classes of producer, no matter what your style is or how you get to the finish line. There's some producers who make the artist's favorite records that they've ever made. And there's some producers who make the artist's most successful records. And you kind of have to figure out which of those producers you are, because it's difficult to be both. Yeah. It really is in a lot of situations. And you've got to know whether you need to override the artist at certain points or whether you just need to deliver their vision. And it can change, on a case-by-case basis. But I think most of us would probably be able to figure out which category we're in.
All right.
It's make the artist's most successful record and make them feel like it's their own. That's the way.
Is that what way all of you approach it?
They already made their record,
Right. Guys, thanks so much for sitting down with us here at GearFest. I mean, we could keep going all day long. There's so much we could talk about. There's so much that goes into producing, but you've shared a ton of wisdom and experience and knowledge with us, and we're just very grateful to have you guys here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You bet. So we got Joe.
Anything for you, Mitch.
I appreciate it. CLA, Quentin, Andrew, Henny, Chris, and Joe. Appreciate you guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. We'll see you soon.
Bye, guys.
See you soon.
All right. Every year I look forward to the producers panel. It's always one of the most fantastic events of GearFest, and this year was simply fantastic. Thanks to everybody who was on the panel, and we're so grateful to them for spending their time with us.